As the temps start rising, I feel the familiar urge to refresh my closet, but I don't want to waste money on pieces I'll only wear once or for just one season. Thankfully, Quince changes that. Their clothes are timeless, lightweight, and far more elevated than anything else at this price. It finally feels like my wardrobe matches my standards. The best part is that Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices and premium fabrics and finishes, so you get to look good while feeling good. I'm pretty excited that I have upgraded my athleisure wardrobe for this summer. I bought a sweatshirt and a pair of wide-leg flow pants that are two of the softest items I own, and I plan to live in them. So join me in giving your summer closet an upgrade with Quince. Go to quince.com/POTC for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/POTC to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/POTC.
When I'm talking about acceptance, I'm not talking about some kind of, BS, like I'm pretending like it doesn't affect me. But I'm, allowing myself to be deeply affected by this and, to feel the pain and the grief. But there's a larger context, a larger kind of encompassing of that pain and suffering that itself is not touched by the pain, that is not in pain itself. This observer part of ourselves.
That was Seth Gillihan on Psychologists Off the Clock. We are three clinical psychologists here to bring you cutting-edge and science-based ideas from psychology to help you flourish in your relationships, work, and health.
I'm Dr. Debbie Sorensen, practicing in Mile High, Denver, Colorado, co-author of Act Daily Journal and an upcoming book on Act for Burnout.
I'm Dr. Yael Schoenbrunn, a Boston-based clinical psychologist, assistant professor at Brown University, and author of the book Work, Parent, Thrive.
And from coastal New England, I'm Dr. Jill Stoddard, author of Be Mighty, the Big Book of Act Metaphors, and the upcoming Imposter No More.
We hope you take what you learn here to build a rich and meaningful life.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock.
Debbie and I are here to introduce an episode I got to interview Seth Gillihan, whose recent book is Mindful Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, A Simple Path to Healing, Hope, and Peace. And I love talking with Seth.
Yeah, he's so genuine and just lovely. I think I really enjoyed listening to this conversation. I really appreciated his openness and how, as I was listening, I was kind of buzzing around the kitchen, like doing some dishes and prepping dinner. And I just felt so sort of grounded listening to him. I'm so glad he came on.
Yeah. He's so authentic and has so many smart evidence-backed tools that can help people. What I think is especially powerful about what he shares in his book and in our conversation is his very personal journey through illness, including just that morning that we met, and how some of the tools that he writes about have helped him to manage a very ongoing challenge that he has with his personal health. And he shares that in a very vulnerable, authentic way, but also in a very inspiring, powerful way. The other part that I wanted to chat about with you, Debbie, is this idea of mindfulness inside of our consumer culture.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm kind of deep into that social criticism of mindfulness and Western wellness. I've read the book McMindfulness and American Detox and a couple other books that kind of critique this. And so for people who aren't familiar with this dilemma, it's like mindfulness is really based on these ancient practices that we know are helpful to people. And I know that personally because I've practiced mindfulness, sometimes on and off formally and also just in my daily life. I find it helpful. There's so much research supporting it. If you're, and obviously the fact that it's been around for so long, it's really helpful to people. But I think the criticism is more around some of the ways it's used in Western wellness these days. First of all, it does have that sort of consumerist, capitalist, like someone's trying to make a buck off you, and so people are selling programs, people are selling accessories to go with it. And I think that can be problematic for one thing. And also it can be used a little bit as a quick fix, I think, and sort of marketed that way, like a feel better strategy, which isn't really consistent with this true spirit of it. And I feel like sometimes people are almost seeking like that blissed out feeling, or that sort of, that full spiritual feeling. In a way, it's great. It's not bad. I think it's really helpful to people, but sometimes it does have almost like an avoidance to it, or a little bit of a like seeking to be, the best mindful person or something like that. And I think sometimes actually it can contribute to people almost like turning away from some of the real problems in the world, which is also not really consistent with, like, for instance, the Buddhist concept of right action. Like, it's not meant to be used as an individual feel better technique. But I do think that often that's how I see it framed in our world that we're living in.
Right. Right. In this kind of a culture, mindfulness has been sort of perverted into this end goal, right, of getting somewhere, either more profit or feel better. And the intention is more to allow us to be present for life's journey in a way that allows us to take right action in moment to moment. And so I think we do need to be careful as we practice mindfulness to make sure that we're using it in ways that are more process oriented instead of outcome driven.
Yeah, as an example of where I've seen this, so I'm writing a burnout book, and I think in the burnout world, like, we know that mindfulness can be really helpful for burnout. But then what happened is that, they started creating these mindfulness programs to help with burnout that have gotten some flack recently, because a lot of times they're used in this sort of quick fix kind of way to get people back to being more productive. And so, like an organization, for instance, a hospital, if you're in healthcare, will like make everyone do this mindfulness program, hoping to get them back up and running. And people are kind of like, you're not addressing the real issues. And it is kind of used sometimes, I think, in these Band-Aid kind of approach ways, which really is not consistent with the heart of true mindfulness in the way that it's been practiced for thousands of years. And I think Seth speaks to this as like, well, how do I personally take the parts of mindfulness that work for me and that benefit me and continue practicing it? So I don't want to toss it. I don't want to toss the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. I want to take the good parts of it, but without getting seduced by those parts of it that are more tied to consumerism and that maybe are used in ways that are kind of, I think, maybe less helpful, but without getting into that trap, right? Without ignoring the problems of the world, without using it as that quick fix kind of thing. And I think that Seth offers a really wonderful voice on that. He clearly finds it helpful and advocates for it, and is also very much aware of some of those problems. So I really appreciated the stance that he takes on this.
Yeah, so I hope that you listen all the way through, because he does really offer some really valuable tips, and we hope that you get a lot out of this conversation with Seth Gillihan. Seth Gillihan is a clinical psychologist, best-selling author, host of the podcast Think, Act, Be, and creator of the Think, Act, Be online school. He specializes in mindful cognitive behavioral therapy and shares his simple research-based practices throughout his work, including through his just published book, Mindful Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, A Simple Path to Healing, Hope, and Peace, which we are here to discuss today. Welcome, Seth.
Well, thanks for having me, Yael. It's good to speak with you again.
It is. It was so much fun to be on your podcast, Think, Act, Be, which is a wonderful podcast that I highly recommend, and I'm really excited to have you on ours. So I want to start by first just applauding this book, which shares a whole lot of science and simple practical tools, but which also shares your very personal journey through illness, both physical illness and psychological illness, depression. And I know from personal experience as a therapist and writer that it can be pretty hard to go public with personal struggles. So I just wanted to kind of start with asking, what was it like for you to share so much of your painful struggle in this pretty vulnerable way?
Yeah, thanks. It's a good question. I mean, it took me quite a while to get there, because I know for many years in my practice, I didn't feel like I could admit to the patients I was treating that I was having any kind of struggle. I mean, obviously, when you're meeting with a health professional or mental health professional, you don't expect them to kind of be sharing like, well, I had a rough morning or that kind of thing. But it could obviously not be helpful a lot of the time. Someone is, if a patient knows that I'm, having a difficult day, then that might affect how how much they feel like they can share or, quote unquote, burden me with what they're dealing with. But I think there also was, I know there was a big part of me that didn't want to admit anything that might make me look weak or like here I am, someone treating depression, and what do you know? Like I wound up depressed and didn't realize it for quite a while because, as you know, a lot of depression symptoms just look like other things, like fatigue or just a number of things that happen one by one, but didn't just announce themselves as depression, insomnia, for example. So I think I finally reached a point where it just didn't really feel like I had another option, or at least the best option that I had was just to be honest. I think that was my overriding. Well, I think my overriding goal in general over these past few years has been to, as I've been dealing with this illness, which is in a lot of ways ongoing, but how to bring more of myself in a way that felt more honest and more real, just more human. And that was explicitly my goal with this book, was to just write in a way that felt true. And when I was being honest about my own struggles, that's often when I knew that I was being honest. I was being honest enough. I was sharing enough of myself in a way that hopefully other people could relate to and find helpful.
Definitely. I think it really is something that makes this book stand apart, because it's like that commercial for the hair club for men from the 1980s. It's like, you're not just the president of the hair club, you're also a member. But there is something so powerful about teaching these tools and saying, I struggle too, and here's what I did that was really helpful, that really transformed some of the pain that I was struggling with into something that I can be proud of, and into a way of being in life that works well. And I think for a lot of the kind of skills that we teach, it can feel a little top down with the therapist or the writer explaining these things. And you're kind of right side by side with the reader, and I'm guessing with your patients, in a way that feels so connecting, which is a part of, I think, of the healing process that you offer.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that. It is funny how there's this, we don't assume that oncologists shouldn't get cancer, or that, pulmonologists will never have sleep apnea. But I think there is an assumption, or at least a hope that people who are treating, mental or psychological conditions, that somehow they'll be on a different plane, that we won't be, or at least maybe those of us who treat these things like to imagine that somehow we're different and set apart, or until we're forced to accept that we're not different. Maybe we like to imagine that sort of thing, but
and I think the reality is many of us are wounded healers. We sort of come into this profession because we've had pain in our lives and have struggled to manage it. And that is sort of part of what drives the interest in psychology and psychology practices.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. Yeah, it's not only is it not an impediment, but it often facilitates something more real, more connected. I really felt, during those years when I was still doing full-time therapy, but I was also, really just struggling every day to get through the day and to get through my sessions. I don't think I ever had a period of more productive or deeper clinical work, because it was just, I was so raw, and it was so easy to connect to what my patients were describing. Not uncommonly, I may have been dealing with something that day that then, one of the people I was treating was going through, and it's such a different thing to kind of, to empathize as if, and then to empathize with really, as you suggested, like alongside someone, like both feet in that person's reality. And like, yes, I know what you're describing. And I'm not just making this up. I'm not imagining what it must be like for you. I never know exactly what it's like for another person, but having had, these these types of struggles, it's just so much, the connection just seems like it's much more meaningful.
Right. I mean, you can't be more validating than when you really are right there, literally experiencing similar kinds of things as the person who's sharing their experience with you. It reminds me, actually, in the very beginning when I was getting trained to be a therapist, one of my very, very first clients had very crippling social anxiety, which I was also struggling with. And it was really amazing because I was getting taught the tools how to treat social anxiety, how people can manage it, using the various strategies in cognitive behavioral therapy, treating this person who I thought was terrific, who I could see those symptoms, and realizing, having all these insights about myself, oh, I can use this too. This really does work. And it was, I think it can be like that, but it does feel like you'd want to more be leading as opposed to totally side by side. I think that's the fear that I have with almost disclosing too much, is that somebody will feel like it's almost the blind leading the blind. How do you stay in the position of, let me think of the word, of having sort of a voice of authority, not necessarily being authoritative, but having some knowledge that you can impart when you're also struggling with similar kinds of things as your clients are?
Yeah. No, that's a really important nuance here. Yeah, that it's not that, yes, we're in exactly the same position, but we're both equally human and have been through similar things or will go through similar things. And yeah, it's not like the oncologist is sitting there, getting a chemo drip alongside the patient. Like, they're having different experiences at different times, and they have different roles. Yeah, I think it's about sharing what I found that works, and how I found a way through, without pretending that now I'm done with that. Like, I used to have difficult, intrusive thoughts too, but now I got rid of them. Versus a more realistic approach, which is more like, I struggle with these types of things from time to time, like a lot of people do. Here's something that can be really helpful when I, need more help in this area. Here's an exercise that I like to try that you can use as well. But yeah, it is a delicate balance, I think, I've found this with other, like some books that I've read, or even people that I've interviewed on my podcast, where it feels like maybe it tips too far in the kind of self-disclosure, we're all human type of way, where it just sort of seems like the person is almost like giving up or something, or just saying like it doesn't feel like there's anything inspiring or better that this person has found. So yeah, I think it's so important to try to find that balance.
Yeah. Okay, so let's back up a little bit and talk about this model that you're sharing in your book, Mindful Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. So you describe at the front end of the book how traditional cognitive behavioral therapy really subscribes to a more medical model, and that this kind of model can be limiting. So I wonder if you can share how traditional CBT can be limited and how mindfulness can help transcend those limitations.
Well, when I was learning about CBT, initially in grad school, it was very explicitly grounded in the medical model, meaning there's, you identify these well-defined problems like depression with specific criteria, and then you find a specific treatment like a medication or cognitive therapy that then you apply to that problem. And then the hope is that you eliminate the problem. So the person, let's say, started out neutral, and they have this medical condition or psychiatric condition, and now they're like a -8. And so you're hoping your treatment can bring them back, maybe back to 0, maybe at least up to like -6 or -5. So there are advantages to that approach. It's easy to measure things. It's easy to specify what the target of your treatment is and what your treatment is. It's easy to match treatments like 16 weeks of cognitive therapy versus 16 weeks of fluoxetine. And yet, I mean, I think most of us, if you think about what's important to you in life, most of us probably don't say like, I really want to just stay right around zero, like as close to zero as possible. Maybe I'm not going to quite get there, but if I could be like a -1 or -2,
That would be close enough.
that would be awesome. So it's a very mechanistic model that, I give the analogy of like a car. Like you buy a car, comes off the assembly line, and that's the best it's ever going to be. And, when you take your car in for service, you're hoping to, keep it as close to that original level as possible. But we're not cars. And most of us, I think, aspire to something better, something like growth or, self-actualization. You had a great conversation with Scott Barry Kaufman on the podcast recently. And as he points out, there are these deep human drives that we have for transcendence, for growth, for self-actualization, and we can't capture those things in a simple medical model like what I learned with CBT, which was let's help this person to remove their symptoms. So that can be a really helpful approach. It helps a lot of people with depression and anxiety and other conditions. But I found that, for me, one of the most exciting things about CBT, and especially about mindful CBT, is the idea of that the ceiling isn't at zero. That we can use these same types of approaches. We can tend to our thoughts and plan effective behaviors, and then bring in the mindful element and really be present in our lives and open to things that are happening. And that allows us, that facilitates our growth. That helps us to remove obstacles that would get in the way of our, growing and becoming more fully who we are. And for me, bringing in mindfulness is really essential for getting there. We can talk more about why that was, but it felt to me at times like I felt a little bit almost like embarrassed of CBT because it felt so not only simple but simplistic. It felt like it was leaving out a lot of who we are, our sort of our full being. And so that, I think, is where mindfulness, I found, really kind of opened up the practice.
Yeah, well, I'd love to hear a bit more about how you came to that realization. And maybe I can sort of put that into context with a question that, well, actually, let me frame it differently, because I'm curious about how you came to the realization that mindfulness was so important. But I want to sort of ask this question that's a little bit two-sided, because I think mindfulness has so much power, and yet we live in this culture where mindfulness has almost been commodified. And so I remember you, before you left Twitter, made some comment that really resonated with me about how mindfulness has really turned into this consumer-driven culture of crystals and oils and yoga pants that really causes it to lose its essence. So how can we use mindfulness in a way that's beneficial, given that we live in a culture that really has transformed mindfulness into something of a commodity?
God, it's such an important question. And I tend to get pretty worked up when I think about this and talk about it, because it feels like a corruption of something that had and that has so much power and potential. So I had this other thing I tweeted back when I was on Twitter. By the way, it's been great being gone, even though there are times.
Do you feel free?
I do. I definitely feel free. I feel, a little bit lost at times where I'm like, oh, this is where I would click over to Twitter at this point.
Are you not on social media at all these days?
I mean, I have Facebook. I barely use it. So yeah, I have very little social media presence now. But this particular tweet was something like, if you meet mindfulness in the road, kill it. So to take off, on that quote, if you meet the Buddha in the road, kill him, meaning, someone says this is what Buddhism is, or this is what it means to be mindful, then it's probably going to be a limiting and kind of bastardized version of whatever the person's describing. And I think that's really, I as I say in the book, I even struggle a lot of the time to use the word mindfulness because it has been reduced so much to, either just sort of stripped of so much of what the practice can involve, that it's kind of like a little hack. Like, oh yeah, here's a thing you can do. Like, it's fine. It can be helpful, but it also seems like it's not a benign thing to water something down to the point where someone doesn't realize that there's so much more to it. And on the other side, there's just so much bullshit that gets added to it. Like you suggested, if someone's into, other, types of things, like, certain costumes that they wear, or bells that they ring, or things like that, I think that's all fine. The best part of me, I think that the true part of me, the way I really think about this, I'm not hating on those things, but only when they're presented as like, well, this is what it means to be mindful. And if you're going to be mindful, then I slip into my quiet, gentle voice, and then you're going to speak in a certain way and dress in a certain way, and it becomes like a kind of like a straitjacket, like a spiritual straitjacket. And I'm guessing this is the psychodynamic part of me, I guess, but I'm guessing I'm also drawing on my own, religious background, that I grew up in a bit of a religious straitjacket myself in fundamentalist Christianity, and having my deepest and most personal experiences and relationships kind of arbitrated by someone outside of myself, I just find infuriating. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of the backdrop for me when I think about mindfulness. So yeah, so it can be hard to talk about without limiting it in some way, but what I found, what I really connected to in what we're calling mindfulness, is I think it all just comes down to connection to the present, connection to myself, connection to other people. And that type of connection, for me, what I experienced that as, just, it feels spiritual. It feels like an inherently, like it inherently feels like it's a part of something that's not mind, not body, but really the deepest part of ourselves, kind of our raw experience of attention or conscious awareness.
Yeah, you have this part in your book where you talk about how listening deeply can be like meditation in action. And I've actually always said that the most mindful I ever am is when I'm conducting therapy, or when I'm listening deeply to a story that my kids are telling, and just everything falls away and I'm just so in it. So for me, that really evoked this, that is what what sort of meditation is, but meditation in action is.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And that, to me, I think sometimes we can have a resistance to mindfulness because, I tried to meditate and it didn't work, or it's just so irritating. And, people think they're so spiritual, but then I go out and see how they live and they look like anyone else or worse. But then when you describe that actual experience, it's grounded in a moment. I think we all can relate to that kind of thing. Like, I was right there. I was just there. I was doing what I was doing. I was in the moment. Whether it's, with a person, or, I had this experience the other day where I think New Year's Day, we had a little gathering of each of our kids. We have 3 kids. They each had, 1 or 2 friends over for kind of an early, like a New Year's Eve lunch. And, it's so interesting at each of their ages to see the very clear developmental window that they're each in. Like, oh, that's what middle school girls are like, like their own sort of subspecies. And sort of, having these moments where you sort of see, like, you see clearly what's happening. And I think we all can relate to those things in a way that we don't have to call it necessarily mindfulness, but just really being connected to your life, connected in a way that's not grasping or resisting, but it's just in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, my favorite definition of mindfulness is, non-judgmental present moment awareness. You're just so in the moment. There's no evaluative component. You're just in it. You're present. And I think most of us have that experience, but it is almost as if by calling it mindfulness, it sort of removes us because we're looking for something that we're not sure we've ever experienced. But if we can sort of peel back the language and just attend to the experience, that is what it is.
Yeah. 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 And then we think we have to be, we think we have to be a certain kind of way in order to be mindful. And often it's sort of anodyne. It's like, stripped of anything. I mean, as if, we can't be angry and mindful or, or active or really just like all the stuff that really makes us juicy as human beings.
Yeah. So I'm going to engage you as my clinical supervisor here for a moment, because I do think as a therapist who's very interested in mindfulness, I'm constantly trying to get people on board with this idea of just kind of sinking into the present moment and attending to their experience. And maybe it is the language, but I often do hear from clients that I'm seeing, I just don't think I'm good at mindfulness, or it doesn't work for me, or it's too boring, or I don't find benefit. So I'm curious how you respond to that in the room, sort of what kinds of language do you use, but also how do you practice it in sessions who are brand new to the idea of this present moment awareness, or who might be resistant to it as a way of, I don't know, exposing them to some of these experiences?
Yeah, I run into that a lot myself, and it can definitely relate to some of those reactions, having had them myself. But I don't tend to push when someone is not, when they're not receptive to it. I mean, I do the best I can to explain clearly, like what the benefits are, and to dispel some of the myths about it, like that mindfulness is only about focusing on your breath, or that it has no relevance for your life outside of meditation, or that you have to wear, certain clothes or sit in a certain way to practice it. But beyond, when someone really is not interested, or they, I lead them through a meditation in one of our sessions together, and while we're doing it, I'm thinking like, oh yeah, like this is a real experience. Like I'm really,
They're going to cry at the end of this.
And it's going to be great. And they're going to say, wow, I've never really experienced mindfulness like that before. Oh, so that's what it is. So we end, and, like, what was that like for you? No right or wrong answers. Just, how'd you experience that? It was fine. I mean, I got kind of bored. My mind wandered, but yeah, and they just kind of move on. Like, as far as they're concerned, it was mostly a non-experience. And
yeah.
so, and I think a lot of this, I mean, for all of us, it's just, there are things that we're open to at certain times that we're ready for, and things that we're not. And as much as I believe that all of us would benefit from, more practice in being present and receiving our reality, I think there are times when we're sort of ready to enter into that kind of practice, and times when we're not. So I try to at least, maybe plant some seeds that a person can come back to, but maybe at a minimum, I would like to not turn the person off from mindfulness forever. Yeah. And then maybe if I've succeeded in not doing that, then maybe that's all right.
Yeah. I like that. I mean, that's acceptance in action, which is a beautiful thing to model and to sort of use as a way to not close people off and cause psychological reactance towards mindfulness. Yeah. I like that.
Yeah, I just want to add, I think that's a great point about modeling it too, that whether or not we're explicitly teaching it, at least we can be embodying it in our sessions, and also just making mindfulness as non-precious as possible, so it doesn't have this kind of weird religious feeling where the person worries they're going to offend us if they don't like it, or they're not a good person if they're not open to it. Like, whatever, you don't have to do it.
Yeah, I love that. So I want to talk a bit more about acceptance in a couple different ways. And I want to start off by having you help us distinguish between acceptance and passivity. So you share this story of non-acceptance, of being in the middle of the night with an infant daughter who wasn't sleeping and really struggling with acceptance. But the opposite of that, you write, is not passivity or resignation. And sometimes it can be hard to distinguish between those. So I wonder if you can help us understand what it means to accept discomfort or something in the world that you don't like, or something in yourself that you don't like, versus to be resigned to it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one big difference to me is there's a different kind of emotional tone that follows from each of those. So when I resign myself to something, or I, I think of resigning as like throwing in the towel. It's kind of a posture of giving up, but acceptance can also be a type of giving up. But this is a sort of defeated way of giving up, and it leaves, I think, a sense of loss, of not just that we haven't gotten what we want, but there's no peace really. I think that's attached to resignation. Whereas acceptance, I think real acceptance does bring its own kind of peace. Like, all right, I can let go of that struggle, a pointless struggle, and accept that this is how things are. I think the really important element that often gets left out, or at least that people imagine is not a part of mindful acceptance, is that then from that place of acceptance, then I can act. So when I, had a very difficult boss, I struggled against that, and I kept trying to, make things work and imagining, if I just, said things right or did the right thing, this person wouldn't be difficult. And then I finally realized she's just difficult. Like I knew that before I started. Everybody told me that. And that's why, so many people have left, because this person is so hard to get along with. And so that acceptance, first it let me release a struggle that wasn't helping, like banging my head against a wall. And then from there, then I could act in a meaningful way. Like, whoa, well, this person's not going to change. I don't want to stay in a job like this, so I'll look for work elsewhere. So acceptance really is the best foundation for taking effective action. So I think that's another really, really big difference. I'm not just resigned, all right, this person's difficult, I'm just going to have this miserable job until I retire. No, it's a more active, engaged acceptance. All right, this is the deal. Now what?
Yeah. Well, you stop fighting the reality that you have no control over and conserve your energy to make choices about where you do have some influence. And I think that is so empowering. But I do want to ask a follow-up question that is a personal question for you, which is, what about realities that we can't change, that we can't walk away from, like illness?
Uh-huh.
How do we accept that and act in ways that move us toward a path of healing if those realities are inalterable?
Yeah, that's a very pertinent question. I mean, I go through highs and lows, or like worse and less worse times with this illness, which is still not completely defined. Like, it's most likely something related to Lyme that's never been treated, but it's hard to get a diagnosis and maybe even harder to find treatment.
Well, and that can be a really hard component to acceptance too, if we if we can't wrap our heads around what it is that we're accepting. And that's a truth of being alive. Like, there are some things that we just can't wrap our heads around because we don't have the answers.
Yeah. And that's something I've gone back and forth on, for the first couple of years. I was really engaged in, let's get to the bottom of this, and, all kinds of tests and scans and specialists. And then at some point I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, I'm taking on so much stress just from the hours of doctor's appointments every week. I just quit it all. I was like, nope, no more doctors, no more, acupuncture and craniosacral massage. I'm just going to, live my life as best I can and try to get some enjoyment and peace and comfort in my day-to-day life. But I mean, my wife and I have had several discussions about this. Like she, has really wanted me to keep looking and, pushing and try to find something that she really believes that I can get to the bottom of this. And so I think I haven't always been clear about where I've fallen between acceptance and resignation. I think times there has been a sort of like, in a way, a giving up that's been helpful in some ways, but maybe not so helpful in others. So this morning, getting back to the present, I just found myself in a really difficult place. Like my nervous system does this weird thing where like I'm all like, hard to describe it. Like it feels like there's something in my nervous system that is trying to get out. And like my body's kind of shaky and I feel like I'm in like psychological pain, but it's through my whole body.
Oh, that
So I
terrible.
used to, I don't prefer it. But I used to have those types of experiences and I would just feel despondent. I describe in the book these kinds of episodes where I'd just be lying on the couch, just like feeling like just hopeless and lost. And now, some of us having more perspective, kind of knowing that, things will probably be better tomorrow or the next day or at some point. That I don't get as lost in them and I don't fight them as much. It's like, all right, this is what's happening now. Today's, harder than other days. And but I hear myself talking about some things sometimes and I don't think I'm intending to, but I think I can give this impression that it's sort of like, and I'm kind of okay with that. It's fine. As if what I want to make sure I include as part of what I'm fine with is the fact that like I'm really fucking pissed off sometimes about it. Like there's still lots of times where I've just had it. I just feel like, like I don't want to do this anymore. Like I can't believe I'm back in this place. And I thought I'd gotten clear of it. And with the physical symptoms where the bottom just falls out at times, my sleep falls apart. But when I'm talking about acceptance, I'm not talking about some kind of, BS, like I'm pretending like it doesn't affect me, but I'm, allowing myself to be deeply affected by this and, to feel the pain and the grief. But there's a larger context, a larger kind of encompassing of that pain and suffering that itself is not touched by the pain, that is not in pain itself, this observer part of ourselves. And that to me is what has felt like the spiritual connection that I found, that I don't think, I say spiritual, but I don't think it has to be a kind of, this sort of like esoteric experience or something that's really that metaphysical. It's just a natural part of ourselves. There's this quality of attention that all of us can tap into, that can observe our experience. And it feels like that part of myself that's always been there, that's always sort of who I've always been, through all the changes of my life. So I don't know what your original question was.
Well, I'm just sitting here with rapt attention and thinking of all of these experiences of my own, as I'm sure our listeners are too, of like, how would it have been different if I had gone through this immense pain and I had just been open to it? I'm actually, this is so random, but because, you had me on to talk about working parenthood, but I'm thinking about childbirth and how different it is to just accept how utterly painful the experience is versus to be fighting for alleviation of pain. And that doesn't, like, if you can accept it, it doesn't mean it's not painful, but it does mean you sort of ride the waves of pain. And it isn't for everybody. And this is a bit of a segue to my next question, because accepting discomfort is part of what's advocated in acceptance-based treatments, but it can get a bit thorny when it comes to psychiatric medications. right? Because those are intended to, for example, alleviate the suffering that goes along with depression or anxiety or other illness. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on psychiatric medication, for example, for depression? And then what was your stance in your own treatment, if you're willing to share?
Yeah, sure. So I know, psychiatric medications have helped a lot of people. I think a lot of people find them, an essential part of their recovery, whether from depression or anxiety or something else. So if someone, is happy with their medication and found it important, then, I think that's great. And, there's a lot of research showing that these medications, certain medications can be helpful for certain conditions. I'm not a fan of medications like benzodiazepines, like Xanax and Ativan for like long-term use for managing anxiety, just because of all the problems that are associated with those, and they're not intended for as a long-term solution, even though they're often prescribed that way. I have to be honest. I don't think I've expressed this as clearly in the past, but I have a lot of misgivings about medication, a lot of reservations about it. I think the effectiveness of medications have been oversold. I think most people don't realize how little, how much of the response to, let's say, a medication for depression is probably attributed to the placebo response. If you look at the studies and you see, placebo is having like a 50% response, and then the medication's having maybe a 60% response. So you're getting like a little boost, and there's pretty good evidence showing that most of the advantage in these clinical trials is probably for people with really severe depression. It's probably not doing much, if anything, for people with mild to moderate, even sort of like low-grade severe depression on average. So, and the side effects are not pleasant for a lot of people, and not just the side effects of going on the medication, but then a lot of people find it, kind of like I don't know exactly the analogy, but once they're taking it, even if it's not helping, it's really hard to get off because of the sometimes severe withdrawal effects the person has. So I don't want to be irresponsible and say that nobody should be on these medications, or that somebody should stop the medications without consulting a doctor. But I mean, personally, I am very reluctant to to take psychiatric medication, medication in general, to be honest, unless it's really needed. But I think I think the drug companies have, by and large, done a really effective job at painting a more optimistic picture of these medications than really matches the reality. So I had several people tell me, I was describing when I was going through, good friends, and they were saying, there's no harm in considering medication. And I mean, they obviously, had my best interest at heart and meant well, but I had no interest in medication, in part because I knew that the type of treatment that, you and I provide, cognitive behavioral therapy, has been shown to be at least as effective as medications. I mean, medications can be helpful, but CBT tends to be more effective in the long run as well. If you want to stop the treatment at some point. But also, I just I looked at my life and saw that I was just a kind of an ideal candidate for these treatments because there were such obvious targets. My thoughts, my way of thinking was all screwed up. So, there's a lot of work that I knew I could do there. My life was not exactly filled with activities that were enjoyable and, important to me. And so I knew there were, things I could do there as well. And then, the practices in mindfulness and meditation that I knew could be helpful. So yeah, I never really even considered going on medication. I'm not saying I wouldn't at some point if, we're in a position where it seemed like that was the best option. But but yeah, I didn't take any medication, and at least at this point, I feel like I wouldn't.
I appreciate you sharing, and thank you for letting me ask such personal questions, because for me, I think, is a part of the conversation that gets ignored, neglected. And so much, I do think, we live in such a consumer-driven culture, and we talked about it with mindfulness, and certainly that's true with medicine, medication of all kinds. I recently got very obsessed with the Sackler family. I watched that show Dope Sick, and then I read Empire of Pain, which is just a total indictment of what the pharmaceutical industry can do and how it can really hoodwink us. And I don't think most of the players are as morally questionable as the Sackler family was. But I do think that the motivations can really color how the evidence gets interpreted. And for that reason, I do think that we have, as a culture, this overly optimistic view of what medications can do, and a belief that we shouldn't have to feel the discomfort of our feelings. And I'll just share, you shared a lot of personal things. I've had a pretty significant anxiety and depression history too, and a pretty significant family history. And I've been told by so many people, including family members, that I should go on medication. I've been similarly reticent, though. I am really appreciative that you're willing to talk about that so openly.
Yeah, I appreciate your sharing that about yourself. To be honest, it's harder for me to. It's harder for me to give my true opinion about medication in general than it is to describe my own struggles and thoughts on medication. Just because, I feel so much concern about liability. Like, what if I discourage someone from taking medication, and then or making people feel bad about being on medication, which I definitely don't want to do. But I also want to give people, as I understand it, the actual state of the science and accurate information so they can make informed choices.
Right. Yeah, and I do think it's complicated because even if it is largely placebo effect and there's some additional piece, if the placebo effect is helping you and you feel better and more able to engage in your life with value, in line with your values, then maybe that's not such a bad thing and shouldn't be discouraged. I think it can get pretty hairy in terms of the recommendations. It's always interesting when I can't prescribe medication because I'm not licensed to do so, but when patients will ask me, should I start medication? Because I don't, same as you, want to discourage it if they think it's the right choice for them. But I do want to share with them some of the hesitations that I might have in terms of, I don't know what the benefits are and what the disadvantages might be.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I agree about the placebo too, that it's, what are you going to do? Like prescribe a placebo, but I think, if it'd be nice if there were as large of a placebo effect in our culture for, therapy as for medication. If people had been convinced that, this is your brain with this little receptor and therapy fits right into that receptor. Yeah. It's with the.
If you read Seth's book, you'll feel amazing. You'll never feel depressed again.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. If we could sell that story, it'd be nice to capitalize on the placebo effect for treatments that have only, as far as I know, pretty much only positive side effects. Like that'd be a nice setup.
Yeah, it would be nice. We'll keep working on that.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So much of what you talk about in mindful cognitive behavioral therapy aligns with acceptance and commitment therapy. And I'm curious where you see those two treatments diverge and where are the important places that they converge?
Yeah. I've been a fan of ACT for a while now, probably since I first learned about it in grad school. I had a great conversation with Steve Hayes on my podcast a couple years ago.
And he blurbed your book as well.
He did, yes. Yeah, very kindly. And
as well did Angela Duckworth and Scott Barry Kaufman.
Yeah, that was
big
so
names
fun
on here.
Yeah. But I think one of the big differences to me is that my experience with ACT is that it pretty much treats thoughts as really not important. It doesn't engage with them very directly. And tell me if I'm misrepresenting anything about ACT. but it's
Well, yeah, I think it's less about modifying thoughts and more about learning to relate to them in different ways.
yeah. So I think that's an important part of my approach. Meeting our thoughts, kind of relating to them in different ways. But I also incorporate some of the parts of more traditional CBT where we do kind of get in there with our thoughts. Take a look at them, especially the ones that keep coming back and that are bothering us, and obviously are not really aligned with reality. Then we can look at the evidence and find maybe a alternative way of thinking that's more helpful, but not in the some of the more hardcore CT stuff. Cognitive therapy is more about let's figure out how much you believe this thought, and then find some evidence that contradicts it, and then figure out, okay, has your belief in the thought gone down? Not giving thoughts that much centrality, where it's all about we have to fix these thoughts, but maybe bringing a lighter touch to it. But I think there are a lot of points of overlap, but it's also just a bit of a different model in that it's kind of CBT plus mindfulness, whereas I feel like ACT is much more along. It sort of really diminishes the cognitive part and focuses more on acceptance and behavior.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a fair description?
I think that is a fair description, but it is interesting because I think that some of the tools that are really common in acceptance and commitment therapy are ones that you use to help folks manage both their thoughts or respond to their thoughts and their behaviors. I'm just thinking, for example, you talk about thought decentering, which I think is very similar to what we call diffusion in acceptance and commitment therapy.
Yes.
It's sort of figuring out how to unhook from thoughts, make them less sticky. And I as I was reading your book, it really is clear that you help people do what cognitive behavioral therapists call thought restructuring, sort of, really not attacking the thoughts, but challenging them and really looking at them and trying to see if you can modify them to be more helpful, which is not something that we do very often in acceptance and commitment therapy. So I think that is, my assessment would align with that too.
Yeah, I do just want to, Scott Barry Kaufman has been very kind, saying things like, this is a revolutionary paradigm. And I don't want to disagree with him, but I also, acknowledge in the book and want to acknowledge in general that this is, there's this cliche, we stand on the shoulders of giants. And, this is stuff that builds on things that others like Steve Hayes and, Zendel Siegel and others have developed. And their work built on the Stoics and
Right.
Tim Beck. So we're all kind of building on each other.
Yeah, collaborating, connected to each other, which is an important part of what you advocate is, to be in connection. Mm-hmm. So, think, act, be is the mantra that you sprinkle throughout the book, Mindful Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. It's the title of your podcast, and it's a beautiful mantra, I think. So I just want to thank you, Seth, for speaking with me today, for this beautiful book, for sharing your personal story, as well as the wisdom that people can take and use themselves. And I really hope people pick up your book, which we will link to in our show notes. And given that you're not on social media, where else can folks find you?
The best place is my website, sethgillihan.com. There are links to everything from there.
Okay, and we'll link to that as well on our blog and in our show notes. Thank you so much, Seth. Hey, Psychologist Off the Clock listeners, I'm going to guess that if you are listening to this episode, that you love to geek out about books in psychology.
So if you are a fellow book nerd like Yael and I, and all of the people around you are tired of you talking about books, then you can join us once a month to really take a deep dive into the books that we're going to be reading together.
So if you want to join us, all you have to do is send an email with the subject heading RSVP to offtheclockpsych@gmail.com, and we'll send you information for upcoming meetings of the book club. We hope to see you there.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. If you enjoy our podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review or contributing on Patreon.
You can get more psychology tips by subscribing to our newsletter, and you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Connect with us on social media and purchase swag from our merch store by going to our website at offtheclockpsych.com/merch.
We'd like to thank our strategic consultant, Michael Harold, and our dissemination coordinator, Katie Rothfelder.
This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatment. If you're having a mental health emergency, dial 911. If you're looking for mental health treatment, please visit the resources page of our website, offtheclockpsych.com.